warm welcome to Helen.
Thank you, Mani.
I met Helen in 2014 in Singapore, of all places. And at the time, we actually had a animated conversation about Andal and about some of the translations that were out there. And last week, I actually typed in her email address and opened our old email correspondence from 7 years ago. And she tells me she did the same thing. So it's really beautiful to come back today to see the book that's out. And it's been a really enjoyable read. I would like to start by asking Helen, could you set the context first, even though, of course, a little introduction has already occurred. Set the context. Tell us who is Andal, in what century did she live, where did she live? And then having done that, could you tell us about your relationship? How did you discover Andal and fall in love with her? And what was the inspiration that led you and sucked you right into that whole story and era? Please.
Okay, sucked you in is a kind of an apt description of the way it felt, being zoomed down into this vortex of bhakti. So Andal, as was described, she has quite a mythic or a mystical, some people say, life. She was born in Srivilliputtur, which is in the very south of India, about 2 hours south of Madurai. She was one of 12 alwas, the 12 divine poet saints of that period, and their work makes up Dilya Pravandam? Is that the correct pronunciation? Nalayadira Diva Prabandam? Yes, thank you. The Vaishnavite canon. And so I just found a book of translations of the Alwa poetry in Delhi, in Chandi Chowk, second-hand, tattered copy on the pavement, took it back to my hotel room, opened it up, and then I read of these 12 Alwas, only one was a woman. That immediately got my attention. And then, of those 12 Alwas, only one was elevated from divine poet to goddess state. That got my attention completely. So through a succession of encounters, events, I ended up in Srivilliputtur, where she was born, just for one day. And I knew I would come back. So a year later, I returned and stayed for some time and did so for the next 6-7 years, just before COVID. Yeah.
Each of those times you were doing research, you were immersing yourself. There's something about the Margari Masam. I don't know how to pronounce it.
Margali, I say. Every time I came to India, I came with the intention to write about her, but that went out the window really quickly because the life there was so full. So all I did was just immerse myself in the daily pujas, the rituals. During Margali, there are particularly wonderful celebrations of her life. It's like entering a storybook, actually. That was my feeling. At first, I was just curious. This was all new. It was quite foreign to me, bhakti. But over time, particularly during 5 days of a very special ritual that's done for 3 hours every day for 5 days, I would go there, and it's like a form of sacred theatre. And I was besotted. I could not get enough. And that immersion came back with me, was very visceral in me when I returned to Australia, and I wrote from that place, as well as doing a lot of research, of course, finding translations of her work.
So very fascinating interweaving of two themes here. One is her own personal experience and how she encountered the story of Andal. Of course, I have, met so many people who have come to India from around the world, and I hear stories about somebody who's attracted to like a Brindavan or Dwarka or a Krishna or some guru or so on. You're the first person I have met who was attracted to Andal, and that becomes the center of your life and enters your heart. And so it's a combination of memoir as well as there is a fictional narrative in this book. It's called Andal's Garland, and in this there are two characters, And would you be able to tell us a little bit about that storyline as well? The two characters who travel to India, so it's a travelogue, and then Andal enters the story, and then you're writing about Andal in the third person, right? So please give the audience some taste of that. What is the narrative? How does Andal enter that? And then what happens? Yeah.
It is a novel. It is fiction. I reimagined Andal's mythic life. That was a wonderful process in itself. But I felt no one in Australia had ever heard of Andal. Nobody. You know, I'd known about Mirabai. Many of my contemporaries back in the 70s, 80s had read Mirabai, translations of Mirabai's ecstatic poetry. But Andal, I just couldn't believe. You know, my love of India for all these decades, I'd never heard about her. So, no, I've lost the
you
thread.
were starting to talk about the two characters in your novel.
That's it, yes.
Yeah.
So,
There's Marcus and there is...
yes, Seisha.
Seisha.
So I thought, well, I can just write about Andal, and it is fiction, but I do, of course, draw on my personal experience to a certain degree. Then I fly off. But I thought I was writing mainly for a Western audience, and to just offer the life of Andal, I may lose some readers because there's so much of the mythic about her and all the many stories and tales. So I thought better to insert a Western character, a contemporary Western woman, and that would help ground the readers, anchor the readers, so that then they could actually really, fall into the life of Andal and be hopefully affected by her.
So these two characters come to India, the Marcus and
Seisha. Yeah.
And then they travel to this town, and Seisha discovers Andal, and then through that you have all the poems and all the descriptions, and sort of recapitulate the Andal life,
yes,
right? So
yes.
you sort of go back and forth in
Yeah,
time.
I intertwine their lives, and in order to get underneath Andal's skin to really understand who she was, I felt like I was in a bit of a wilderness, particularly when I was back in Australia. I had no mentor, no person who could actually talk me through Tamil words and the deeper meaning of them. So I gathered together 7 or 8 translations of her work from Tamil into English. And that was my research, really, just to understand her. I'm really happy to have to offer this, her Tirupavai, my adaptations of her work. But that was a way to get under her skin. Now, where was I going next?
Would you like to read an excerpt from the novel first?
Sure.
And then, and that way we can get a taste of it.
With those translations, the Tirupavai and Natya Tirumalai, I begin each chapter with a couple of lines from those verses. So it begins with a couple of lines from Natya Tirumalai, her second body of work. She says, "You ruin our sand castles, then come into our courtyard. O Govinda, you span the earth, then break into our hearts." So this is in the voice, or about Andal, not in her voice, it's third person. Every morning when her father returned home from his garden, Andal joined him in their courtyard. She watched Vishnuchita intently as he wove flowers for her dark-skinned god, reclined on his serpent bed in the temple next door. Never had a day passed where Vishnuchita did not enter the temple's innermost shrine, hold high the garlands he had made, and whisper gratitude into the ears of Lord Tirumal for the gift of his daughter. Mounds of marigold and roses, sacred basil, lotus, and kuvalai lilies lay in piles all around them. In the summer, Andal brought her father talumpu flowers fallen from high branches in the night. They looked like little white trumpets and smelled sweet for days. "Do not pick them from the tree," Vishnuchita said. "Take only the one gods let fall." Andal helped her father choose colours and perfumes, but she was not allowed to touch the garlands once they were made. They were offerings for the divine and must not be polluted by any human hand. Bud by bud, Vishnuchita twined, stopping to measure one length against the other, sprinkling them with water and laying them in a silk-lined basket. Lost in the rhythm of his work, Vishnu Chita's mind began its wanderings through all the myths and songs he had been sung by his father and his grandfather. He would gauge the expression on his daughter's face and choose one for her. That is, unless she had not already begun pleading for a particular story. Andal knew all of Lord Tiramal's avatars and consorts, Vamana the dwarf and Varaha the boar, Kamadeva with his love arrows. But it was one blue-skinned boy who persisted with his visits to her dreams. Again and again he came, taking her hand, leading her to the village where he had been born, Vrindavan, far away to the north.
Very evocative. Do you think you could share a little bit more about Andal? I mean, let's not assume that everybody knows who is Andal. You know, she's a very young girl.
Yes,
I know
she only
the
lived.
daughter of Vishnu Chitta.
Yeah,
Please tell
yeah.
us a little bit more about the
Yeah.
story and the legend itself.
So her father, Vishnu Chita, was also an alwa. So she grew up in a home that was constantly immersed in poetry and song. People would visit their house, other poets, travelling troubadours. Her life was very short. She lived for just 16 years. She had a kind of immaculate life, the Immaculate Birth. She was found under a sacred basil bush. It's said she's an incarnation of Bhuma Devi or Bhudevi, the goddess of Mother Earth. And she was found by Vishnu Chita, who was a temple priest and also temple gardener. So Vishnu Chita was her adopted father. And I say in the book she had Varaji, her adopted mother. And she, as was expressed in the beginning, she refused to marry a mortal man, only God would do. And she stuck fast to that dream. She would not be swayed by anyone, anybody, anything. So in many ways, I've had feedback from women in India also that she's an inspiration for them now when they're caught in arranged marriage, particularly, where they know they have to do this, but something in them is not wholly accepting of this. She continues to be a voice for women and for women standing up for what they truly believe in.
What do you love about her other than this spirit of the love for the divine? What is it that attracts you to her? Is it the poetry? Is it the fact that she has become a legend? And because you talked about how in the beginning when you discovered that one of the Alvars was a woman and then has been elevated to the status of the divine, that was what struck you. And later it seems to be her life that has attracted. What particular aspect of it attracts you to her?
She had chutzpah. You know that word,
Okay.
Shelley? The crux of the story, the middle of the story, the turning point of the story is when she decides to wear the garland that her father had made to be offered to the god that evening. And this was taboo. So I liked her spirit. I also could relate to her deep, deep yearning for something that was missing. And the story goes that she was up in Vaikuntha, in heaven, had a very satisfying life there, but she heard these cries from earth, from humans, and she couldn't understand them. There was a suffering in those cries. And it was like it was a yearning for love. It was a yearning for feeling the fullness that love gives us when we do fall in love. We feel complete somehow. And she said, "Oh, I need to go down there. I need to experience what this is, what this deep longing feels like." So that's she received permission, and that's what she did.
It's so interesting for me to hear this through your perspective and to see what attracted you to it. Yesterday, I asked Helen, I was trying to understand a little bit more about her relationship with Andal, and I said, "Is she in your home? How is she a part of your life?" And she told me that she has Andal's image in her bedroom and her kitchen, and she lights an incense daily. So it is a relationship of adoration that you didn't want to use the word devotee, but I said perhaps it's love for Andal, right? But love for Krishna, no.
Oh, how can I say no to
Okay,
Krishna?
so but it is via media Andal. It is
Yeah,
Andal that you relate
yes.
to and identify with. So it's
Totally,
really
yes.
very interesting
Yeah.
in this book. The other thing I would like to point out, just to help us, readers, is that there is a lot of other speculative and other thoughtful, reflective content in this book. I'll read out a couple of lines that I, stopped at when I was reading. Um, this is um, uh, this is in quotes. It's a character talking. All the knowledge in the world is useless tinsel if it's not integrated into life, the Siddharth told me. They were the words that his close friend Rajaji had written after reading Adi Shankara. Jnana and bhakti, knowledge and devotion, are two paths, but they are not different. When wisdom comes alive in your heart and flows out as action, it becomes devotion. I followed Vasur's eyes up into the sky. What star was he seeing, and what were the odds of us sitting here together, light years below? So, it's the whole story, even though it is fabricated around two characters who discover Andal, etc., it's quite expansive. It touches upon a lot of interesting ideas that I suppose come through when you encounter India, per se, right?
And her verses too. Her
And
verses opened up
yeah.
to the vast myths
Yeah.
of India.
Maybe you
of
could
Vaishnav.
read us a couple of the poems from
okay.
your adaptations for us.
This is Pasaram 12. Crying she-buffaloes with heavy udders, hungry calves bound by rope. The earth is soaked with milk, and we stand ankle-deep in the mire. Dew-drenched at your threshold, we chant Namaha, arise and come. Listen, cowherd sister, to our songs seeking refuge in Rama's righteous anger, destroying the 10-headed king of Lanka. Such sleeping is scandalous. Wake up and join us, El Orempavai. She's quite playful too. That's another thing that I loved about Andal in the way she writes. She's a little bit cheeky. So here she's speaking to Napanai, who is with Krishna, and they're banging on the door trying to wake him up to get him to come with them to the pond. Asleep on a feathered bed, fragrant incense circled in jeweled light. Unlatch your door studded with bells, auntie. Wake up your daughter. Is she deaf or dumb? Bewitched? Can she not hear our chants to Krishna? Mamava, mysterious one. Madhava, consort of Lakshmi, residing in the paradise of Vaikuntha. Open your eyes, open your heart's door to us, El Orempavai.
Thank you. It's a little hard to compete with whatever is happening in the other venue, but I would like to make one last point before we open up for questions. Helen's relationship with India is, I think, goes way back. She's been coming to the country for a long, long time. And you also have family connection. Is it like a heritage of some kind?
My father was born in Simla, and my most favourite photo of him is being held up by his Amma, his nurse, in Dal Lake in Srinagar. This little baby boy, black and white, old black and white
photograph. So it is like a rediscovery of your roots in some way.
And my maternal grandmother had always aspired to go to India. She had books of Rabindranath Tagore on her bookshelf. So as a young child, I could see those books, and I learned about her dreams to go there. But she was of an age where, women did travel, across the seas, but they were very few and far between. So I really feel somehow that I've heard that dreams can skip generations, that I'm living that dream for her.
Oh, that's beautiful. And to now launch this book back in India, it comes full circles.
I can't tell you how.
Congratulations. Yeah.
How
So
grateful I
can
am.
we
that